The Salty Sales Sages.
Hello and welcome to the Salty Sales Sages. I'm Simon Stillwell,
And I'm Greg Romer.
and today we are joined by Kham Inthirath. Welcome, Kham.
Glad to be here.
This episode is going to focus on helping sales leaders cut through the noise and understand where AI can actually drive results for sales teams. To help us unpack fact from fiction, we've got Kham joining us. Kham is an AI advisor, a business growth strategist, and a CEO of Compound Effect. But in my mind, perhaps uniquely, he's not just a technologist. Kham brings over 20 years of hands-on experience in marketing, sales, and customer success, which I think makes a significant difference to the way he approaches this. Welcome. Let's get started. Okay, so what's real and what's hype, Kham? I mean, there are hundreds of AI tools promising to revolutionize sales. I get introduced to a new one every single week. So how can sales leaders separate the buzz from what's actually creating impact in the field?
It's a common question that I get, and it's also very complex because there's always new tools coming out, right? And there's like the next shiny best thing, the next shiny best thing. The best advice I give to folks is when you're looking at the technology that you want to use is, does it have a reputation? Like, make sure it's a brand that you trust. Like Salesforce and HubSpot have really good AI agents, and it makes sense that they are going to be at the forefront of what's going on with AI, but sometimes they're a little slower because they're a bigger company versus some of these smaller companies that spin up can say, hey, we have this AI agent, it's got to do all these outbound calls, it's got to remove like 90% of what you do. Everything sounds great. But when you look under the hood, it takes an existing AI model and they're just wrapping it. So that's why some of these smaller companies, they pop up everywhere because they're just taking like ChatGPT and they're putting like some type of wrapper on it. And so versus Salesforce, they're either using a LLM, which is a large learning model, or they're building a version of their own, and it's more proprietary to them, so it's a lot more stable. Ask for a demo, use it, play with it, because that's anything that we do. Even the established players like Salesforce, use the demo, see how good it is. Does it really work with the way you want it to work out? Because we tried companies where they had established technology that we definitely knew was reliable versus ones that were newer, and go head to head. And sometimes that newer one is much better. It's much smoother. It sounds more natural. But then the question is the R&D, the security. There's more. So there's like layers and layers, Simon, that, what I help with AI advising is just like understanding all these nuances so that, you're buying a product that, yes, gets you to the endpoint, helps you close more deals, save more time for your salespeople. But then you got to look at like the security side and privacy side. Is it reliable? What if they sell your data? What if that company gets bought out and now that data is with that new company that bought it? Even though they might have said, hey, we don't, we encrypt everything, we don't share it, but then that new company acquires them and they might have a different policy.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that as being a common fear. I mean, I myself use a tool called Fathom, right, to help me. And of course, I realize that Fathom is recording everything that I do and say. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be stored forever, right? So yeah, I get why that's a little bit concerning. Useful as it is. So what common mistakes do companies make when trying to adopt AI? And are there useful general principles for decision makers to kind of understand, what's actually hype and what isn't?
Common mistakes is that people want to get right into deployment. They know the outcome is, I want to start doing funnels quicker, or I want it to personalize my emails, or I want to do like outbound calls for me. And that's like phase 2, maybe phase 3, depending on how sophisticated the sales cycle is for the client and how many touches, and if it's a shorter sale, longer sale. You have to do phase 1, which is the discovery, understanding exactly like what's the technology stack you have now, because you might be able to do what you need to do with very little work and new technology or infrastructure in place with some of your existing tech versus like buying a brand new one and overhauling everything. Because salespeople don't like change either. So it's getting understanding the full landscape. What are we trying to achieve as a sales organization? And then uncovering use cases, okay? And then prioritizing it. Then you start to do the execution. A lot of people fail because they just do things disjointed. They want to get live right away, but it doesn't tie back to the company goals. They didn't do any training. That's the biggest gap too, Greg and Simon, is like no one does the training. They just like buy it, they roll it out to the team and say, here you go, guys, I got you AI. It should make you 40% more productive. It should also increase your closing rate by X percent. And because they get all the case studies, right? But they don't actually properly train and get feedback. There's a learning curve to these things for salespeople. So that's where I see it's the training gap and then the planning gap. They're skipping those two and they're going right to deployment.
So sounds very similar to where I've deployed it in personal lending and small loans. Very similar issues of people running before they can walk. Is there any obvious aspect of sales where it's going to fit faster and with less effort than other aspects? So, for example, last week we did a thing on forecasting and comparing the data that salespeople put into CRM systems to say, how accurate is this forecast of this sale? It would seem to me that was one area it would fit reasonably well because the data's there. It's semi-consistent, and where there are patterns, and you can backdate sales that actually came through or sales that failed. There should be patterns that the AI could recognise. If my salespeople are behaving in a certain way, doing a certain number of meetings, doing a certain amount of follow-up, it's an indicator that the sale will happen. If they're not doing that, it won't. Is that something where it's a more obvious fit, would you say?
Yeah, especially sales leaders, they love the fact that they can get, as close as predictable as possible, Greg, right? Using AI to kind of distill like, all right, looking at our target audience, and this is our ICP, right? Ideal client profiles that are, like what were the leading indicators? What happened in those types of deals? It can then reverse engineer. You can start looking at patterns and then try to model out how do we get more of those. But to do that, you have to have good, clean data, right? So that's the other big issue I run into all the time. Was like, you can't really move beyond anything output until you actually have good inputs and clean data. So are the salespeople tracking their activity accurately?
Yeah.
Right. That's a big issue. Even though they're like, you have one salesperson that's crushing it and another one that isn't, but that person that's crushing it says, hey, look, I'm crushing it. Don't bog me down with all this like tedious like tracking and but we need that insight. It's like, so let's call this person Steve. Like, Steve, we get that you feel like we might be slowing you down a little bit, but the insight you can provide, the data, is going to actually help the whole organization and team because we want to see what activities you're doing because we want to mimic you so we can have another superstar like you. So like that's the challenge, Greg, is that getting that right data in there so that we can see the correct forecast. But that's one. On the other side of it, let's say you have all the data. Correct. You can start starting to uncover patterns and forecasting. It's never 100%, but it's better than 0. It's better than 50.
So we talked last week about pipelines and forecasting, right? And there was a specific tool that we were talking about. But where else in the workflow? I mean, you're talking about processes, Kham. So where else in sort of sales workflow, other than pipeline, okay, should sales leaders be focusing on that AI can help with? And is this, second part of the question, is it by using existing tools that are out there, or is it mostly by actually using a company like you to actually pull everything together and write some code, or how does that work? So what are the other areas? I
always try to help executives and team members and departments uncover like quick wins. Like what can you do now simple with like ChatGPT, right? But that's a pretty common accessible tool, right? Getting ChatGPT for $20, you get the plus and then they have a pro. So you can utilize that now to create personalized decks. You can use it to kind of start to see kind of like how you do scope of work. So if you upload multiple scopes of work, and then you can just speak to it. For me, I like to talk to it, and I just like to talk. It's just faster than typing. So I think if a salesperson's on the road or they're just working quickly, they can say, okay, hey, I have another proposal to do here. Here's the challenge that the client's facing. Here's what I'm proposing. Can you identify the products and services that I have to align with this? it will know that because you already trained it with multiple different other past statement of work, and it writes it. It literally in minutes. That's how I build it for myself as well. All these tedious things that salespeople have to do all the time, they can create different, just on ChatGPT, different bots or different threads that they can just rely on. That says, like, if it's emails, it starts to understand your cadence, your tone, how you do emails, so it replies back like you because you're training it. Just like you have to treat the threads like a human, which is kind of odd to say, right? But if you're talking to a person who's your assistant, for example, over time, they start to like anticipate what you want. So, and that's what these virtual bots or these threads that you create in ChatGPT or even in Gemini will be. They start to anticipate how you write your proposals, how you write your emails. And then the last one is creating like a sales coach / mentor, because salespeople, they need confidence, and when they're down, having that virtual mentor, because maybe that manager might not be as empathetic and sympathetic because they just want their salespeople to just, like, because some sales managers are just very harsh, like, hey, you got to hit your numbers, right? Maybe they're not as nurturing. And I've been to that. I remember I started in sales and consulting back in the day, so I can empathize, sympathize with salespeople, like what they're trying to do. So having that kind of like sales coach that is personalized for you helps elevate like the mentality of a salesperson, so they can have the confidence to go crush it.
So, are you suggesting that if that's what you want to achieve, especially when it comes, I think they're brilliant, right? The whole concept of pitching. And getting better and better at your pitch and your objection handling and all that kind of stuff is really a clever idea. Are you suggesting that you should, if that's an objective, then a company should look at buying one of those tools? Or are you saying that you can do that yourself using ChatGPT and a bit of help?
You can do that right now at ChatGPT. You can create like a custom GPT, train it on the types of clients and what you're doing for selling. So now it really kind of is more personalized for you. If you want to make it a lot more sophisticated, that's when you start to build other, workflows, and they call it machine learning, so more in depth. But I think right out of the gate, just so someone that's newer to AI, you can use ChatGPT to do that for you.
And do you think the average sales leader would be capable of doing that, or have the time to do that, or is that where companies like yours, the Compound Effect, come in?
It's a mix of time and knowledge, right? So if they feel comfortable going in, I really think most people should be able to do it. I mean, also you can Google it and look at YouTube videos and it's there, but then that goes for anything. Like you can do that for sales or social media. Like people just they don't have the time, and some people are just lazy. So that's where there's value in me and other advisors out there where they need to like pay for someone to come in and just help them just get it done and build it. So it really depends again on knowledge and time.
So do you see AI in the longer term? Let's have a bit of vision and look out into the future. Will sales change, or will the people in sales have to adapt their own behavior, but essentially do the same job just with AI?
What did we do before cell phones?
Yeah.
Now we have them. What did we do before Google? Right? So it's like, what did we do before AI? So it's got to be weaved in every aspect of our business: marketing, sales, client success, leadership, finance, all that stuff, like onboarding, HR. So we're already seeing it today. Like tons of leaders or sales leaders are asking me like, hey, I can't find good help, Kham. Like I need another like sales leader, or I need an account manager or an AE. So can we build up an agent to act like that? And it's like, yeah, we can try it out, see how it goes. And we've heard a lot of case studies out there that it's done great. Other times, depending on the type of sales that you have, you can get away with maybe having the AI do 20, 30, 60% of the work, and then hand it off to a person, a human, to like continue the sales cycle and close it. But I wouldn't be surprised though, Greg, I can't make this prediction, but I wouldn't be surprised in 2 to 5 years, certain aspects are completely removed. But now that frees up that person who used to be an SDR to maybe do a different role that's a little bit more human touch that's needed.
So let me paint a scenario and tell me if this is pie in the sky, 2 years, 5 years, or never going to happen. Greg Grimer calls up Simon Stillwell and he says, I've got this great pitch for you, blah, 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 blah. Everything's being recorded, which happens today on Otter and these other things, right? At the end of the call, an AI system writes a proposal to Simon, structures it all, Greg checks it, says, yeah, that looks exactly what I said on the thing, sends it off, right? Simon's recorded the call too, and his AI says, that proposal's great, but I thought I heard $50,000, not £50,000. And it picks that difference out, right? Which is a bit of a difference, okay? Because we're both Englishmen, but he thinks in dollars because he's in America. Is that 2 years away, 5 years away, or never going to happen?
Actually, I think that actually can happen now.
Right.
We're building agents right now where they can talk to each other, because these are just data points, Greg. And when you're having recordings, it converts to a transcript, so the information is there. So it's as long as it can analyze the transcript, but also the AI can also understand context and listen to audio. But especially with those note takers, they transition to transcripts.
But
it's super accurate.
How does it package the proposal that Greg first sends to Simon today? How is that proposal packaged? Because obviously it's got the raw text of what I said. It's got the intelligence to be able to structure that into some sort of proposal, and know what sections to put it in. How does it build the formatting around that proposal? How well does it? That has to be presumably trained. You don't just show it an example proposal and say make a proposal like that, do you? It's not that good yet.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how many style proposals you have, right? If you have 3 or 5 different styles based on the scope of work, or if you have one, that makes it a lot easier. Just like a human, if they brought into onboard working with you, Greg, it's going to probably have a longer learning curve because you have multiple different proposal types and services. But if you have like one proposal type but several services, that's much easier. Yeah. But that's all doable. I mean, like basically think of it like a workflow. So you're building out a workflow. So you have like the AI agent bot, and you say, hey, it attends my meetings. After my meetings, it understands the way contextually what I'm saying. It goes back into the knowledge resource database of all the services and products that your company does. It also goes back and looks at your proposal types. It cross-references it. It says, yep, this looks like it, matches it up. It already knows the template. It gives you the output. You receive it. It also backs up the proposal in, let's say, HubSpot or Salesforce, whatever you're using. So it's documented there. It sends you an email. And it doesn't send anything off to the client, because I would create a human trigger to say that you have to sign off on it, Greg. You look at it because it sends it to you via email or even Slack or Teams, right, internally, whatever you want to do there. And you say, yep, looks good. Boom. Once you hit yes, it will then send a nice email to Simon, because it also understands the last meeting you had, and it writes a personalized email. And Simon thinks the whole time that you did the whole thing.
So transactional sales are going to be, they're the most obvious for this. In other words, if I'm selling paper or something that's very well defined, and I say, right, it's 320 grams per square meter or whatever it is, I'm selling something, a defined commodity to people. They know what they're buying, I know what I'm selling. We're both somewhat expert in what's in the thing that's being transacted. Then I can see that this works really well. What about more complex sales? Did it work just as well? Or because presumably I'm going to have to read that proposal to make sure it hasn't got errors in it. When are the
100%? I mean, it can take complexity very well, because I think about it again. It's like the supercomputer versus just a one human person. Because the alternative, it's we make mistakes too. We forget, right? AI doesn't get tired. It doesn't it can access complex data and then simplify it. So it's a great assistant, because I think if you still need to do the output, Greg, you would leverage it as an assistant. If you wanted to do a full output, go ahead and let it do that, and then you just do the editing checkpoint. So it's basically, depending on how complex the sale is how much involved you want to get into it. Until you start trusting the AI that's been accurate in multiple sales calls with you, that's when you start kind of letting it do more and more on its own. So again, no different than a human, right? Once you start to trust them, they've been there long enough, you're not spot checking as much. You might be spot checking every time, but now you might spot check every 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. Okay.
I can see tremendous value in that, because I think with long, and you think about some of the deals that we've been involved in, Greg, in our careers, some of them are long and complex. They take 18 months, right? You have, 20 meetings, endless phone calls. You speak with, all kinds of different stakeholders. And yes,
you've got to circle back. You've got to circle back and go and read your notes. Where are my notes?
If you're a good boy, you put in good notes into your CRM. But that means you've got to then read them all. And who the hell does that, right? So if you then have an AI, that can then just go through all of that history and summarize it without missing anything, I can see the value there. One of the things I have spotted in my own use of AI tools, though, is inaccuracies, right? And I've seen that when I'm using an AI assistant or a note taker, I've seen even when someone on the other end of the call is using the same note taker, the note's completely different. And I've seen also when I look at the summaries, at least, we're each missing a different point, a data point. So the idea of actually going through and checking everything is really, really, really critical, I think. It can save you a ton of time. But if you ignore the human element at the end, at least in my experience today, that's where you're going to fall down, because it actually may not have got some things right, because it may not have transcribed them correctly. That's what I'm finding. Is that reasonable, or?
It is. If you guys have the same brand, let's say if it's Otter, you're both using Fathom. Again, AI is not like a software, right? Software, typically, it's always consistent output. AI is similar to a human. If you ask a question, it's going to give you an answer. If you ask it again a few minutes later, it's going to give you a similar answer. It might change some of the words around, but the context of that answer is still exactly the same. So that's why the note taker might be different. No different than you and I are in the same exact meeting today, Simon. I'm going to write my notes differently than how you're going to write the notes, but we both are like in agreement what we talked about. So that's why you're not seeing it the same, even though it's the same brand company. The added benefit, if you have like a paid version of these note takers, which I highly recommend, is that you can have interactions with the AI. So you can say, like, by the way, I had a meeting with Simon. Can you double check again, like all of the wants that he needs, or what is all of the challenges he's facing? So because it might have listed 4, but the fact that you asked it to go back again, it might come back and list 7.
Wow, it is interesting, and it seems to me from what we're talking about here that again this. To help companies, they can use a mixture of tools like commercially available note takers, which is what we're talking about, and other programming that they either do themselves by using training ChatGPT or another solution like that. So you can mix the two and go through the process, your entire sales process, and figure out, okay, what are the things that are repeatable that we can take out and improve. Is that fair?
Yeah, you like ideally at the end of the day, it's data, right? The note takers, Simon, that's data that has to get stored somewhere. So we call it like a vector database. So you want, like, I call it the brain. Build the brain, make it smart, have it then understand like your sales metrics and KPIs, have it also get context from all your collateral pieces, your decks of all the salespeople of all that they've done. If all the salespeople have recordings, feed it the recordings. So now it's getting multiple sources to make this brain bigger. And then when you say, okay, I have an idea, I want to do this thing, you tap into the brain to give it that output. So that's how you can now turn that central brain into an onboarding bot for new salespeople, because it's learning. It already has a central database. You can use it to create customized decks. You can use it. So there's a lot of different ways of, once you have clean data and a good database, you can start adding more things and take things out.
Yeah, to that point, I could see it being very useful for distributed sales teams working from home, where you've got hundreds of salespeople and like a multi-level marketing type thing where they're selling something, and also for people doing the young brokers, where brokers are joining to learn how to be brokers, and they have an enormous turnover rate, don't they? They take sort of 10 people on and train them for everyone who actually lasts the course and then becomes a broker. So that would greatly reduce. They could really structure, this is how you go about doing this task, and then they'd know if they weren't on point. You'd almost be able to warn the salespeople by a message saying you're not doing enough activity to hit your target this month, and that you wouldn't need a manager making 300 different calls to 300 different salespeople. So I can see it being very useful there. In terms of outbound, so actually using this to write to people or contact prospects and suspects, do you think personalization at scale is doable, or do you think humans will be able to detect this is pulling data about me from the web to try and personalize it, it's not done it particularly well compared to a human. Do you think AI can do personalization at scale well?
That is its one of its top, superpowers.
Yeah.
Is that it can scale personalization.
So
before AI,
describe to me what that looks like. Imagine you're selling something to me. What does it look like when I get that email or get that LinkedIn message?
So, for example, let's say you're managing 1,000 accounts, right? So you have to break that up over the course of a few months, and you want to segment into. Let's say you can talk to your AI and say, give it a name, right? So let's say it's Alex. Hey, Alex, can you identify all of my clients that I haven't talked to in a month, and just reach out to them and see anything personal about them that's in the CRM, and just don't make it salesy. Just do a check-in. If you did good notes as a salesperson, you noted all these different people, that person likes to ski, that person has a dog, that person has a daughter, this person likes to play golf. It starts to pull in all that. So then it's actually doing email outreach or LinkedIn outreach at scale that's personalized, because again, the data is the core source. It's pulling it from your CRM and it's doing that outreach. And it looks like I took the time to say hey Greg, how are you doing? It looks like it's ski season. You have anything planned? And do
you think that the technology exists today or will exist soon where that's not detectable by a fairly sophisticated buyer that you're using that kind of technology? Because if you're detected as using that, I would think it was counterproductive. I wouldn't like to be contacted by a robot rather than the human. And so if you are using it, you better not. I better not realize it.
But that's Greg. You and I both know. I posted about this a little while ago, right? When I got an attempt at personalization that clearly had come from AI, and it had pulled some information from my website. It had pulled some information from me publicly, and it had sort of attempted to stick it together, right? And it wasn't very good. Number one, it was clearly written by a machine, the personalization, and then amusingly, they got my name wrong and called me Colin, right? Which was a sort of punchline. But let's assume they got my name right. It was still shit, okay? And it just because it just didn't really work. And so far, and I've had a bunch of these. I'm sure we all have, right? So far, I get that it's possible, but I have never seen it. I've never been on the receiving end, as far as I know, right? I've never been on the receiving end. And I do say as far as I know, because someone might stick their hand up and go, actually, mate, that was not me.
They will never tell you.
Yeah. As far as I do know, or at least I've seen ham-fisted attempts at it, right? Have you seen ones that really are slick and human? Honestly, have you seen them?
So just to address that feedback, Simon, you're absolutely correct. Before AI, right, people were doing funnels, automation, drip campaigns, all that stuff. You can usually tell when someone has an unsophisticated drip campaign versus someone that actually took the time and built it out. And it felt much more natural. It was just thought out. So that's no different here. The difference between why people still feel like it's AI calling me, or because they don't take the time, going back to my earlier conversation, phase one, plan it, build it, blueprint it, and then execute it. They just want to execute. And I see that even in marketing, people just want to start doing lead generation campaigns, email drip campaigns. I'm like, wait a second, are we personalizing this? Where's the data coming from? So these are the questions that have to be asked, and it has to probably get built. For those that do it right, Simon, you won't know.
Yeah, no, sure. You wouldn't know.
All right, fair enough. Okay.
Right, should we round it off with your final question then, Simon?
This will be my final thing, right? So what's the baseline knowledge that today's salespeople have to have when it comes to AI? That's the first thing. And how can sales leaders upskill their team without overwhelming them? You touched on this a little bit earlier, right? The concept of, you've got to spend the time training. And I see that all the time, right? Sales leaders grab a new bit of technology, dump it on the team and go, right, now you've got a whole node of extra work to do, but it's going to be great, and then it just doesn't work. So how do you get around that? And what has your experience been working with certainly sales organizations?
The reality today is there was some study, over 70% of people are already bringing AI tools into their workspace. There's no AI. Some of these companies, most of them, don't have AI policies. So now you're having people like uploading proprietary information, all this stuff into the AI because they're just thinking about, I need to save time. I like it, I use it, and rightfully so. But they're doing it the wrong way. There's security and like all that issues there. So that literacy part, Simon, is so critical for leaders to understand. Like there could be vulnerabilities happening right under their nose and they don't realize it. Then you need to have at least one person, if not like an AI council, that is championing this. So maybe identify one salesperson who says, I want to take on the responsibility of really understanding AI so that I'm sharing what I'm hearing out there and I can bring it to the team. Or ideally in a company, because I think companies really need to consider AI across their whole company, you would have one person represent each department, marketing, ops, a leader, and you kind of have this like council, an AI council. So they learn from each other and like, oh, that's interesting how you used it like that. Can I apply that to my sales department? So you need to basically create that culture of it's learning. I mean, that's happening. You have to have that anyway, Simon, right? But you have to have that acceptance of AI culture learning, which is what you need. And then you need to create some type of learning cadence because the tools change almost monthly.
Yeah.
And I live this stuff every day, and it's challenging for me to keep up with it.
Yeah.
And I have to be the filter to like figure out what's fluff, what's real, and then say, here's what it means to you. Based on like, we might have already built a workflow and we built this really sophisticated workflow and it's doing awesome, but then a new feature rolls out or that company gets acquired and we're like, ooh, that got bought by this other company. We don't know what they're gonna do with your data. We might need to switch out the models that we just built or the system, the LLM system. So that is where literacy and being on top of what's happening in the news, having that AI council or AI champion is going to be critical so that you're constantly training and communicating to your sales team like what's happening so that they're always at the forefront of what's going on and no one gets in trouble for security reasons, but also competitive advantage. If your other competitors are more organized, they're just going to blow by you.
Yeah. I've got one follow-up question. Sorry, Greg, right. But I've got one follow-up question around security because you've mentioned security now several times, right? So we all know that OpenAI is ChatGPT. There are loads of others out there, right? But by loading up data and you talked about it then, proprietary information, which you would need to do in order for this stuff to work, right? In order for you to be able to create proposals, you're having to load this stuff up. Even with organizations like that are well known, how can you possibly be confident in the security of your proprietary information? Is there any way of controlling that, locking it down, making sure salespeople or others don't put it in the wrong place? And what confidence have you got in these organizations that they're actually going to keep your data private?
Definitely when we're working and building, like if we're working with sensitive data, like we work with like biotech companies, engineers, and medical, you wouldn't do the cloud version, or if you're doing a cloud version, it's an enterprise level, right? So it's basically enclosed in a secure environment versus if you're just doing like ChatGPT and it's like open, even though they say in their terms and conditions, this is your data, we don't train it, it's encrypted. I say, if it's in the cloud, like it's not guaranteed. But if you work with your IT department because they have to be involved and they need to be involved every time just to make sure everything's compliant, they will ensure and they will test it to make sure everything is enclosed and secure. Because financial institutions are doing major brands are doing this now, so they've been using it now for easily over 2 years, a year and a half. So it's definitely reliable and secure. You're just going to make sure you're taking the right steps and measures to do it. But the cheaper versions, the cheaper models that aren't enterprise level, they are not as secure. So you do have to make the time and the investment to make sure it's secure if you have really important data.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Kham. Been excellent discussion, and I've learned a lot, and I sell AI.
Yeah, me too. It's been brilliant, Kham. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, man.
Thanks.
Kham,
you're welcome.
From the Compound Effect.